Hi, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar hosted by the JGLWA Grand Lake Watershed Association. During the next hour, we will learn and talk about the Eurasian Watermilfoil, EWM, an invasive species that is rapidly spreading in our lake. My name is Juan Sanchez. I am a biologist and the project coordinator of the JGLWA Grand Lake Watershed Association. Joining me today as panelists are Dr. Meghann Bruce from the Canadian River Institute and Sarah Cusack from the New Brunswick Invasive Species Council. I will start this webinar by presenting our organization's findings on the spread of EWM in the Grand Lake. Meghann will then share her insights on proposed management strategies for EWM. And finally, Sarah will talk about what to do if you suspect that EWM is on your property. You're welcome to ask any questions through the chat. We will try to answer a couple of them between presentations, but most will be addressed at the end during the discussion. So before we dive into the findings of the JGLWA Grand Lake Watershed Association, I want to talk a little bit about why we are so interested in this plan. The Eurasian Watermilfoil is a fresh aquatic plant from Asia that came to America either through the disposal of water from both ballast or through the aquarium industry due to its popularity as an ornamental plant. Both ways could have led to an unintended release into North American water systems. EWM is an invasive species in every sense of the word. First, it has a rapid growth rate that is faster than native species. Second, it reproduces not only sexually through flowers, but also vegetatively. For instance, it can generate whole plants from stem fragments. Third, it has a high tolerance for multiple environmental conditions, including various types of substrates and nutrient levels. Fourth, since it was recently introduced to North America, it lacks natural predators that can control its population growth. And finally, it has a competitive strategy to outcompete other plants by forming dense mats. EWM can grow so densely that it creates thick layers or clumps of plants on the water surface. These mats can block sunlight from reaching other plants, reducing local biodiversity. Furthermore, when the dense mats die off, they generate a lot of organic matter that decompose, and the process consumes a lot of oxygen, decreasing water quality and affecting other organisms like fishes. In addition to environmental impacts, there are also cultural and social consequences. The thick mats can make activities like swimming, fishing, boating, and kayaking difficult and unpleasant. And also, properties near affected water bodies may see a decrease in value due to the negative impacts of EWM in recreational opportunities. So now, after reviewing the impacts of the Eurasian Watermilfoil on lakes and other water bodies, let's briefly discuss what this plant looks like and how to identify it. So EWM is a plant commonly recognized for having an elongated stem, as you can see in the picture, with multiple nodes, from which finely divided feather-like leaves emerge. As you can see in the plant cut, this is a fragment of Eurasian Watermilfoil. You can see the leaf have a kind of feather-like leaves, and these small hairs in the leaves are called leaflets. Here in North America, we have several other species of milfoils that look very similar to EWM. For instance, here's an example of a native species found in our lakes called the variable leaf watermilfoil. Today, I will teach you 3 attributes that I used during my field surveys to identify these plants. First, there is a difference in the branching pattern between the invasive and the native species. EWM tends to branch from the top. So you will see like a single stem coming from the bottom of the lake, and then branching on the top. In comparison, native species usually branch from the bottom, with single stems coming up to the surface. Second, you can compare how the leaves behave when they are taken out of the water. For EWM, when you take it out of the water, the leaves will fall back toward the stem, appearing soft and relaxed. In contrast, native species, the leaves remain a bit rigid and will not fall back when you take out the stem from the water. Finally, to be completely sure about your identification, you need to observe the leaf shape and count the number of leaflets on one side of the leaf. For instance, the Eurasian Watermilfoil has between 15 to 24 leaflets on only one side of the leaf. And it also have a more neat appearance, like a feather. In contrast, native species, they tend to have less than 15 leaflets on one side of the leaf, and they do not look as organized and neat as those of the Eurasian Watermilfoil. So therefore, to be confident in your identification, you should count at least 15 leaflets or more on one side of the leaf of the plant that you suspect it is EWM. Great. So having this clear, let's talk about EWM spread in the Grand Lake. So the latest record of no detection of this plant in the systems is from 2013 during the BioBlitz at the Grand Lake Meadows. The Envy Museum Center of Biodiversity Research conducted a catalog of multiple plants in this wetland and found no trace of EWM, only native species like the variable leaf watermilfoil. However, in 2016, Meghann reported the first detection of EWM in the St. John River. By 2018, the spread of EWM had been confirmed in more tributaries of the St. John River, including the Jensek River. From there, in 2022, a member of our organization recorded the first infestation of EWM in the Grand Lake in Dickman Cove. He noticed an increase of the number of plants present in the shores of its property and got in contact with the Invasive Species Council. The organization, concerned by this increase, decided to start a monitoring program with two parts. First, we initiated removal pilots to assess the effectiveness of different techniques to remove the plant. And second, we implemented lake patrols to monitor the spread of EWM, identify where it has spread, and determine which areas are in a critical situation. For the removal pilot, we tested two removal techniques from a management perspective. Because the area was small and the infestation wasn't that large, this means that we couldn't establish multiple plots to have a more robust result of the effect of the different techniques we were testing. So we established 3 plots using corkscrew stakes with 20 meters of rope between the anchors and implemented 3 different treatments. As you can see in the picture, we have a clipping treatment where the stems of the plant were clipped, a hand removal treatment where the roots were removed, and a control plot where the plants were not disturbed. We hired divers to remove all plants resembling Eurasian watermilfoil from the plots, and all removed individuals were counted and weighted. We also counted those individuals that we left behind on the control plot. So, the following year, we visited the plots again and surveyed the plant that had grown within the plots. We encountered some surprises due to the dynamic nature of the lake. We lost marking of 2 treatment plots, the clipping and the hand removal plots. As you can see in the picture, I had to do some snorkeling to try to find these plots, but I couldn't. And at the end, I had to use GPS coordinates as a reference for my surveys. Also, as you can see in the second picture, the control plot was partially exposed above the water. You can see there the screw we used to mark the plot. And this was caused due to the water level of last year, which was very low. This has some effects on our results. But what did we find during our surveys? In August and September, we conducted 2 visits and found that EWN was absent in half of the treatment plots. The treatment plots are, as you can see in the pictures, they are drawn in a pink square gridded. So we didn't find plants in almost half of them due to the water levels. But, however, as expected, the hand removal plot had fewer and smaller individuals compared to the stem clipping plot. As you can see in the green circle and the yellow circle, the plants over there were a little bit more sparse and didn't grow so densely compared to the clipping the clipping treatment highlighted by the red circle. You can see there was a dense growth at the end of September. From these observations, the main takeaways that we can get is that the lake dynamics can affect removal outcomes in unexpected ways. And we need to account for this for better assessment of this technique's effectiveness. Nonetheless, the treatment with clipping did not have an evident impact on EWM growth compared to the hand removal plot. Regarding our monitoring efforts, we wanted to understand how the spread of the Eurasian watermilfoil was progressing within the lake. To determine where to start our surveys, we considered the preferred habitat for EWM, which include depths of around 3 meters and substrates of sand and rock. So based on this, potentially all open shores of the lake and could serve as a suitable habitat. So we decided to focus on locations such as boat launch and ramps that could act as a source point for infestations due to the activity of boats that could cut fragments and move them across the lake. We contacted experts and reviewed available information on the spread of EWM within the lake. Recent surveys were reported in the Maquapit Lake and Grand Lake meadows. So we decided to conduct our surveys along the east side of the lake and some points on the west side, such as Douglas Harbor and Newcastle Creek. During our patrols, we use either kayaks or paddleboards and follow a zigzag pattern along the shore, looking for the plant from the surface and then returning in a straight line. When we saw a plant resembling EWM or a native species, we will make an ID using the displayed trace. And if the presence of EWM or a native species was confirmed, we noted the observation coordinates using a GPS. We did surveys in 2023 and 2024, but in addition to our kayak and paddle surveys, we tested other methods to survey EWM. In 2023, the team conducted surveys in Douglas Harbor, Didman Cove, and White Cove. But they also tested a new remote-operated vehicle, like an aquatic drone with a camera, and explored the lake to test the detection of this remote-operated vehicle to detect EWM presence. In 2024, we decided not to use the remote-operated vehicle because it frequently got entangled with the plants, requiring a lot of time to clean and reset it in the water. So instead, this last year, I decided to attach a camera under my paddleboard to do some underwater recording. This allowed me to gather some information about the density of plants that were growing and also about the substrate where these plants were growing. So what did we find and what do we know about the spread of EWM in the lake? So first, we got expert confirmation of the presence of EWM in Maquapit Lake and Grand Lake meadows. In these areas, the plant is already widespread and is likely due to the ideal substrate and multiple and high nutrient levels in these areas, which facilitate the growth of EWM. Through our surveys, we found evidence of newly established populations. As you can see in the map, Wiggins Cove had we detected population spreading in early 2023, and that increased in 2024. And we also got the first recording of plants infesting, of EWM infesting this area in 2024. We also observed an increase of infestation in Douglas Harbor. In 2023, there were sparse patches, but by 2024, these patches had spread along all the shores of the harbor, with first indications of dense mats forming. I will talk more about this at the end of my slides. On another note, there was a discontinuous invasion pattern on the east side. EWM appears to be spreading, but hasn't invaded areas in a continuous way. In these areas, in Wiggins Cove, Dunes Cove, I didn't find very consistent populations of plants along the shores, but a few individuals between a couple of kilometers. So this might be an indication that rather than being driven by the jumping of the water between of the plant between coves, it could be influenced by both activity and the natural dynamics of the lake. Also, Dune Cove exhibit a pattern of early infestation, as you can see within the circle, as EWM individuals were found on rocky shores near to areas of muddy substrate, but they weren't found in these muddy areas, which is an ideal habitat. Another important takeaway that I got from my surveys is that the substrate has an important influence on the establishment of EWM and the rate of growth and infestation that it can get. Here are some photos that I took with my underwater camera. In sandy substrates, the plant struggles to establish because the conditions are not ideal for root development. So it tries to develop as many stems as possible to spread to different locations, as you can see in this photo. In contrast, in rocky or bedrock substrates, the plant grows in a sparse manner because it cannot establish dense growth due to the rocky conditions. Lastly, in areas like Douglas Harbor, where the substrate is muddy and nutrient-rich, the plants establish densely and grew rapidly compared to other types of substrates. This has important implications for monitoring and removal efforts. Rocky shores have lower infestation rates, which might improve removal attempts. And also, sandy shores require a bit more of attention, as these can host EWM individuals that can generate shoots that can be easily sprayed by tidal activity. Now, after reviewing all the information from our surveys and removal tests, we have a few plans for this year. For our removal efforts, we need to readjust the Dickman Cove removal approach based on the lake's influence. Understanding the influence of the lake in our removal attempts is crucial to planning more effective removal efforts. Also, we want to start removal activity in Douglas Harbor due to its strong EWM infestation. As you can see in these pictures, in 2023, the plant was already widespread, especially in the area called the boat's bedroom, but not as much in other parts of the cove. However, by 2024, I confirmed a significant increase in EWM density and early signs of mud formation, as you can see in the next picture. We believe this area will be ideal for a new removal pilot, not only because of the higher number of plants, but also because this area is protected from the wind and ice movement, will make easier to compare our findings from the removal trials. We also plan to start removing individuals in areas where we think it's beginning to spread or is early spreading. This is something we need to work further, but I want to remind everybody that sadly, complete removal is not possible, but management to keep this plant under control is. The plant prefers high nutrient, muddy, and still waters, so some locations of the lake will have more chances to not be infested by this plant. So, what comes next regarding our monitoring efforts? Well, more patrols are coming. We will focus our efforts next year on unsampled coves on the north side of the lake. We also want to keep an eye on and monitor areas where the occurrence of EWM is scarce and exhibits early invasion signs. So these areas could be potential removal areas as well. We also want to monitor the biodiversity changes caused by EWM in areas where it is already dense and see if we can find any way to support our native plants against these invasive species. And finally, we will continue promoting best management practices on our shores, like the Clean and Drain and Dry initiative. To achieve all of this, we need your help. We invite you to join us this year in our EWM patrols. If you have a kayak or a paddleboard and want to join us in these patrols, you are very welcome. We will provide more information later this month. And if you're unable to join us, but know someone who has a property in the north area, or you own a property that has shore in the north area of the lake, we will greatly appreciate your assistance in allowing us to launch from your property to extend our search area for this plant. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But now we can move on with Meghann and her talk about management strategies to deal with EWM. Thank you.
Management is not eradication. What that means is that management is a commitment to continually invest resources or carry out an activity that suppresses the growth of the plant. Eradication would be total removal. And my colleagues with the Environmental Protection Agency in Maine, who have been managing Eurasian watermilfoil for over 20 years, say that they actually only have one case of eradication in all of their management attempts. This is kind of contradictory to some information that you may find online if you find a company, for instance, that has a herbicide. But I'd like to note that those types of those companies don't have follow-up biomonitoring for long term. And so the Environmental Protection Agency in Maine has been using a multitude of approaches to attempt to eradication, and they've only been able to do it successfully once. And that was actually in an isolated quarry, so very different than our systems here, where there was 15 plants originally found, and they combined different management techniques and had to repeat management over several years. And I think there's 7 years of that quarry being Eurasian watermilfoil free, but that was a lot of effort. Nonetheless, it is one success attempt, but it's a very different environment and colonization status than what we're dealing with. Also, something that's not talked about very often is how management strategies, they also have negative impacts on aquatic ecosystems. Different approaches have different impacts. Those impacts are different depending on the ecosystem. We'll talk about some of those considerations. And last but not least, management requires significant resources. And on the slide, I'm showing a picture of a news article from Quebec in 2018, where there was an announcement of $8 million put into Eurasian watermilfoil management. 8 million, for perspective, is about our entire environmental trust fund budget for the province every year. And that supports a lot of important work for water quality monitoring. All of our watershed groups, I think, use environmental trust fund funding, and as well as other environmental groups for our whole province, tackling many issues. And Quebec still has Eurasian watermilfoil in the so despite $8 million later, they still don't have successful eradication. So that's an example of intense resources used for management. But there are, some situations where management is a little bit more feasible than others. So let's take a look at the different things that some places do. There are these machines that are like an underwater lawnmower, essentially. So it's a mechanical harvesting of the plant. What it does is it crops it off underwater, and it pulls the fragments in the plant mass out of the water. So like a lawnmower, and trying to pick up the fragments and remove them. Inevitably, some get away, can't catch them all, but you want to remove that bulk of plant material from the water. The plant roots stay in the sediment, though. So this is a temporary means, think like mowing your lawn, but underwater. There's also hand pulling or diver assisted suction. So there are these large devices or contraptions. These do get some of the roots, not all of them, because they're intertwined with rocks and sediment. But the idea is to get more of that root mass out, and it requires divers and people to operate this equipment. So it's a bit different than the underwater lawnmowers, because there's actually people under the water targeting the roots of the plant to harvest as much as possible. There are herbicides available. Some are more selective than others, some are more broad spectrum. So a herbicide is a chemical added to the water to suppress plant growth. I'll come back to these in a moment when I talk about limitations, but There are herbicides that some places use, and some places use a combination of these techniques. So maybe they use the mechanical harvesting plus the herbicides. So it's not necessarily one or other approach. Sometimes these are in combination. There are also milfoil weevils. So this is biocontrol. We don't have these that are native here, but they're native to Eurasia. And in the plant's native range, this is actually what is thought to keep the population in check and from becoming more invasive than it is. So these weevils feed on the tips of the plant. You can see they're feeding on the plant stems here. What that does is that causes tissue necrosis. So the plant dies off and just kind of sinks to the bottom, loses its buoyancy, and then the plant dies. So there has been discussion about introducing weevils that would feed on this plant to knock it back. When I say has been a discussion, this is not a discussion with regulators. This is a discussion in the plant management world of all the things that can be done to manage aquatic invasive plants. And with Eurasian watermilfoil, I do think that one has been used in other places. There's also benthic barriers. So these benthic mats, large mats that are sunk, usually sunk to the bottom of the water. That's why they're called benthic. Sometimes mats are floated. The idea is that it's blocking out light because, like other plants, they require light to grow. So this is placed on the bottom of a river or lake bed. And then sometimes these are moved around. One other approach is water level drawdown. So obviously this is only feasible in the case if it's around a reservoir. The idea is that if there's Eurasian watermilfoil growing around the edge of a body of water, if you can draw that water down when it's cold and freeze that root base, it may knock it back. Of course, that is highly dependent on the shape of the shoreline, whether it's a steep drop, whether it's a gradual drop, and where the Eurasian watermilfoil is growing. There's a lot of factors. Nutrient management is another approach. Now, this isn't Eurasian watermilfoil specific. This is to prevent eutrophication of water bodies. And it's something that I think that most of our watersheds are and have been making an effort to do for the past few decades. So it's not Eurasian watermilfoil specific, but it's also important to note that natural background amounts of nutrients in some water bodies are perfectly sufficient and normal to support plant growth. So also shading dye treatments. So this one is not used a lot for Eurasian watermilfoil. There were just a couple exploratory discussions of it, but nothing really in scientific literature that I came across. Here's the concept is that you can pour this chemical in the water and it says UV protection and aesthetic enhancements that you can use from a fire. So it blocks out the light. So as opposed to like a benthic mat that was blocking out the light, this is a chemical that you add to the water that has UV protection. And if you're not familiar with how aquatic ecosystems work, UV and light penetration is what starts the food chain. So essentially by adding this chemical, you're knocking out the food chain from the very base. So that energy from the sun, just like in a terrestrial environment, enters the ecosystem and promotes algal and plant growth, which other things feed on. And this approach is to block that out. So with all these different things that you may find when you Google, something to consider is that the effectiveness and the feasibility of these, it's highly dependent on the circumstances of your situation. So how bad is the colonization? Is it an extensive colonization? Is it a recent colonization? What is the nature of the environment? Is it flowing water or is it still water? And what are the other ecological factors? Are there other species at risk or other species that we're concerned about there? And the bottom line here is that just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should do something. That's what I mean by taking into account these considerations. So now let's go back and review each of those approaches, but emphasize their limitations or acknowledge their limitations a little bit more. So mechanical harvesting, so these underwater lawn mowers, they spread fragments. While a lot of the plant material does come out of the water, not all of it does, and it's these fragments that can actually serve as propagules for supporting colonization. And it's only a temporary solution because it doesn't get the roots out. It does disrupt the ecosystem because it obviously doesn't target one specific plant type or animals that may be using that plant as habitat. So even though when we acknowledge invasive species, when we talk about the species moving in and disrupting the ecosystem as it is, once it's replaced native plants, and it's serving as a plant bed that is a nursery for juvenile fish, for invertebrates, for other important aspects of the ecosystem. If you remove that totally, the management of the plant then has an impact on that ecosystem because you've taken away that habitat for the animals that are using that. Even if it's not the same habitat they had and it's different animals than were there before or in different numbers, what we're doing is then compounding that impact. Also comes with a high cost. So the Maine Environmental Protection Agency shared with me some rough numbers in US dollars. And this was a couple of years ago where I reviewed this, and it was up to 10,000 US or around $10,000, I think, US per hectare. And there's different management strategies there, but that's just to give you a ballpark range. Obviously, that's very different depending on what method you use and the environment you're in, the amount of labor. But also a consideration is that we don't have these machines here, right? So they would have to come in from somewhere else. So there's high cost and practical limitations for area. So you can imagine how hard it is sometimes in the summer to keep up with mowing your own lawn. Now, the Woolastook St. John River is 673 kilometers long. Not all of it is Eurasian Watermilfoil, but many, many kilometers are. And then there's Grand Lake and all of the other tributaries as well. So rendering, like, whereas this is only a temporary approach, keeping up with that would be very difficult. This would be a strategy that you might use in a localized area. And diver-assisted pulling, so suction harvesting, obviously labor intensive because somebody has to go down there and find all of the plants. So it's scouring back and forth, covering every square meter and manipulating that equipment to harvest the plant, as much of the rhizome, the root, as possible. So this has got limited feasibility to small infestations. This obviously wouldn't be practical at a lake scale. And part of the issue with even doing these localized management initiatives is we have to be able to prioritize and choose what those areas are, knowing that they will be recolonized, if not from the propagules that remain in the sediment, but those that come from elsewhere in surrounding waters. But again, it also disrupts the ecosystem because it's disturbing the sediment. So there's other little things that live in the sediment that are really important. It can also have an impact on water quality and have high costs. Herbicides. So there's lots of promotion of herbicides online that you can find. They do work. There are some that are more selective and targeted than others. So some will target all plant growth, others may be more specific, but it can still have non-targeted impacts because we have other closely related species in this region. So not just Eurasian watermilfoil, but we've got numerous other native milfoil species. So that's an important consideration. And again, it's only a temporary suppression of growth. Often what the folks in Maine are seeing with their attempts is that they have to change herbicides over time or use more potent because they're selecting for resistance. Almost like overuse of antibiotics is selecting for antibiotic resistance. We see herbicide resistance evolving in these populations of Eurasian watermilfoil that we try to control. There may be regulatory constraints, understandable. We have to be very conscious of any substance we're adding to the water. Sometimes when we're even starting these conversations, fish is kind of the one species that is used as a metric for if something is considered toxic or not. But that's not representative of all species in the ecosystem. So there's never a guarantee that we're not having other unforeseen impacts. And even when it does work, it knocks out a whole bunch of plant mass. We then shift to a point where that breakdown of that organic matter can change conditions in the water and deplete oxygen from the breakdown, so changing the water quality. So it's not as simple as adding a chemical to the water and making it go away. Also, there's logistics. Often herbicides require contact time. So contact time at a particular concentration. So you need to add a certain amount, and it has to stay in place, having contact with the plant for it to be absorbed, enter the plant's vascular tissue, and then be able to kill the plant. And the problem with that is many of our waters are flowing water, so things would get diluted, and it would be hard in a flowing environment to have that contact time. It's very different than, say, if it's in a quarry or somebody's private pond or a small lake. So there's certainly logistics that complicate this as well. So the weevils, the biocontrol, they're very slow acting, is one limitation. And how successful this is depends on the ecology of the environment, everything from temperature to things that are present that also feed on the weevils, like fish. Maybe in some situations, fish will pick them off. And so this has differential success depending on that environment. It can also have non-targeted effects if they feed on native species. And often the weevil population drops as the plant population dies. And then when the plant restores growth from the roots and sediment, there aren't weevils then to resume this biocontrol. Benthic bearers, blackout mats. First of all, this has a very limited area of effectiveness. So for instance, can you imagine trying to cover hectares of bottom with river mats, especially in a flowing environment? They do sometimes have maintenance issues with sedimentation on top, and then plants can actually colonize on that. So they're often put in place and moved around a bit. But even then, it's choking out the bottom. If you put a bunch of plant mass underneath one of those mats, that then starts to degrade. And again, impacts the organisms that live under there and can have impacts on water quality with the breakdown of plant matter. With water level drawdown, as I said before, it's got to be around a reservoir. So that's not applicable to most areas. And again, it's the slope and of the shoreline where the plant is growing, and is it cold enough to be able to freeze that plant out? And it doesn't just have an impact on the plant, the Eurasian Watermilfoil, it's all of the plants and the invertebrates and things that live in the substrate can then also get froze, which is not what they're adapted to. And inconsistent effectiveness. Sometimes this just doesn't always work. Nutrient management is a long-term commitment. As I said, I think that most watersheds are already working towards this, as well as our government. It's a slow effect that affects all species, but natural nutrient sources may be sufficient to promote plant growth anyways. So this is something that we should be doing in our watersheds, but not necessarily expecting it to be significant in the management of Eurasian watermilfoil. And the shading dye treatments, I can only imagine the amount of chemical that you would have to add to the water to be able to have that impact here, first of all. But it is also a temporary solution and impacts all photosynthetic, so all organisms that require light and support the base of that food chain. Maybe this is something that like a golf course could use in a pond, or somebody in their private pond, but not the scale at which we're looking at. So then in what situations or should we manage Eurasian watermilfoil? And I've thought of 3 here. Now, there may very well be others. These are just 3 that I've conceptually thought what is feasible and safe practice to do in New Brunswick. And the first is early colonizations where it's feasible to minimize negative impacts. So for instance, if we found a few plants around a private boat launch in Yoho Lake, if we had a protocol in place where we could go out and support the removal, maybe just hand pulling, and maybe that is a launch that can be visited to frequently hand pull till we exhaust the energy resources of that plant before it spreads through the lake. Also, any localized management that can decrease the spread to other areas. So for instance, in Douglas Harbor in Grand Lake, where there is an extensive infestation, if there was a path that was cleared or mowed where boats could launch and load, just to minimize the chances that they're picking up Eurasian watermilfoil fragments as they leave. They should be doing clean, drain, dry anyways, but It's kind of that Swiss cheese model of layering all of these things that we can do to minimize the chances of spread and introduction to new water bodies. Also isolated areas, so it might be other smaller lakes, where we can accept that we are managing for recreation and not the ecosystem. If that's a decision we wanted to make, then things like herbicides may be applicable in those situations, because they're lower risk where they're not contiguous with other waters. And another one, as I'm thinking out loud here, would be even if in Grand Lake we found, maybe a population of a rare aquatic plant and Eurasian watermilfoil was encroaching on that habitat, maybe we would have an approach determined where we could try to keep Eurasian watermilfoil back from knocking that out. So there are situations where we manage, but we have to just prioritize what those are to make the best use of our resources, but also minimize the negative impacts of management itself. And this is why biomonitoring is so important, because biomonitoring, like the work that the Jemseg Grand Lake Watershed Association is doing, provides an up-to-date understanding of colonization status and helps inform these priorities. That's how we know what these situations are, is when people are biomonitoring and report these back. So that's what's required to identify these priorities. So here's our best bet. This is what we should be doing. Clean, drain, dry, prevent new introductions. Be able to educate as many people as possible for the identification of this plant, to be able to detect new early introductions, and support as many groups as possible to carry out biomonitoring. So my key points, I guess, from today are that, yes, there are ways that Eurasian watermilfoil can be managed, but we have to carefully consider the context, the activity, and the environment that we're doing it in to make sure we're not doing more harm than good. Management actions should reflect priorities that are identified by biomonitoring, and everyone needs to do their part to prevent spread and new introductions. My last request before I conclude is please help this conversation going. From my experience, when discussion fades, people tend to think that it's not an issue anymore and that it's no longer a concern. And that's not the case, and it hinders aquatic conservation initiatives. So it's not that we've just, done our public outreach and the conversation ends there. We have to continue this conversation. In New Brunswick, our freshwater ecosystems are vital not only for biodiversity, but they're integral to the socioeconomic well-being of New Brunswickers. And we have a lot more to lose if we don't protect our freshwater. So despite this colonization of Eurasian watermilfoil being very unfortunate and beyond eradication, it's something that we can learn from to make sure that we're not creating the situation over again with other plants. And it's something that we can use to think about our priorities for management that will apply to other species. So with that, thank you for your attention. I welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Meghann, for such a great presentation. We have a couple of questions. The first one is, are the weevils a native species? I think you answered that during the presentation, but just to
Yeah,
clarify.
not the ones that are feeding, not the Eurasian watermilfoil one, the one that prefers that species. That's not a native species, native to Eurasia, but not here.
Oh, okay. Right. So there are not native species in Maine, like that one is brought from Asia?
Yeah, I actually don't know if it's Maine that's using that approach. I'd have to double check. That was one that I'd found more in the literature. Maine is mainly using mechanical suction and herbicides, and they have done some mats. There's not a lot of people doing weevils because it is so slow acting, low success. And there was a research group in Ontario, though, that was testing selectivity for the weevils. So could they train the weevils essentially to only feed on Eurasian watermilfoil to minimize the impacts to native species? And one of the limitations of that is when you do that in a lab environment, you don't know what selection pressures happen out in the real world, in the real environment, how that population would adapt over time. So that was one hesitation of that work.
All right. So, but do you think I mean, not native species like the Barren water milfoil and other native, they have predators in the Grand Lake. So do you think at some point these predators may jump into EWM? But like, we don't know now, but is that
It's hard to
possibility?
say, but given that in the United States, so even going south of Maine to where there's been colonized Eurasian watermilfoil for much longer, they're still having the battle, and they would have other native species in less harsh winters. Um, and they haven't seen anything particularly
Mm,
taking after the Eurasian watermilfoil.
I see. Good to know. So we have another question about if there's any herbicide that it's approved that kills Eurasian water milfoil. But of course, like as you already mentioned, like this strategy is not going to work very well in the Grand Lake. But thinking about in a different context, maybe a smaller lake near the Grand Lake that has an infestation, do you think there is a herbicide that can be used for recreational purposes?
Yeah, I don't know of one off of the top of my mind, and I think because we're not actually doing any of this work here in New Brunswick yet, the chances are it's not approved. That's not to say that it couldn't be. It might be that when that management action becomes called for and the circumstances are right, then that is reviewed. The herbicides now definitely wouldn't be specific to Eurasian water milfoil, and that's the one that you would want. You would want the one that is most likely targeting Eurasian water milfoil and not other native plant species. And that one definitely wouldn't, not to my knowledge, is approved here yet. So while I'm not 100% absolute on that answer, I can't see how it would have gone through that process without the management driving that.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we will continue with Sarah. Sarah, the screen is yours.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, looks perfect.
Okay, perfect. So we've had great discussion tonight from both Juan and Meg. I'm just going to finish us out with a quick little presentation on now you think you found your Asian water milfoil, now what? Just make sure my screen goes next. Of course it's not. Okay, so you think you found your Asian water milfoil or EWM. The best thing that you can do is report your sighting. So reporting invasives is very important in the fight against their spread, especially since this data can be used to track the spread, which ultimately informs management decisions and prevention activities, as have been mentioned already tonight. In terms of broader outside of Grand Lake and even within Grand Lake, you can reach out to us at the New Brunswick Invasive Species Council very easily through our email, report@nbinvasives.ca, or if you're finding some right in Grand Lake while you're out kayaking, paddling, boating, you can direct the reporting to Juan, and Juan can translate that to us as well. But some things to think about when you're reporting your sighting, you want to include your name, the location that you found the specimen. If you have GPS coordinates, that's great. If you can give a relative area. Also, if you take a picture on your phone, sometimes the location is enabled on your phone and you can pull the specific location right from the georeferencing in your photo. And it's also important to include any details and identifying features and include a size reference. So throw your hand in there, throw a water bottle, anything like that, just to give a size reference when other people are looking at the photo to confirm your sighting. It's always good to take more than one photo as well. And if you're really keen, a video, and you can get from all the different angles and capture the entire individual. When it comes to aquatic plants, sometimes it's easier to identify them by looking underwater because they're not as floppy. When you take them out of the water and hold them in your hand, it can be more difficult to identify them. But any picture is better than no picture at all. And then another thing that you can take into consideration, I don't know if you folks have heard about iNaturalist, but even if you're curious and you think you may have found it, or you found a species or a plant that doesn't look familiar to yourself, you can report it anyways. You can upload your pictures to iNaturalist, and that way others can help you identify what you're looking at. It's a great way to get to know your native species so that you're able to understand what the invasive species are when they appear, and you can contribute to different citizen scientist projects and always be on the lookout for different species. And the big thing once you've reported something or we've got a confirmation of a species in the area, such as Eurasian water milfoil, it's really important to make others aware so that they can be vigilant and reduce the chances of spreading it even further. So we do this through increasing signage. You may have seen some around at your local boat launches. And New Brunswick Invasive Species Council, we're always trying to increase the signage that's out there to make everyone aware that there are potential for invasive species to be introduced to different areas. So that's, again, sign installation, doing public outreach, attending this webinar so that you're getting a better understanding of Eurasian watermilfoil and where it is in Grand Lake. And also there's a lot of different watershed groups out there sharing information on social media related to this species. So you can always be learning more. Some things that are what not to do. We've talked a lot about the different options, about a lot of different things Meg has talked about in terms of literature wise. But it's important to really, really drive home at the end of this that Eurasian watermilfoil is spreading through fragmentation primarily, which means disturbing it will only make more plants down the line. So if you do any shoreline raking, cutting plant stems in front of your property, or dragging box springs with your boats, that's something that we've heard of as well, or other styles of equipment across a patch of this plant will only make more Eurasian watermilfoil. It may clear the patch of your property temporarily, but it could cause problems downstream or further along the shoreline, just based on the fact of fragmentation. So the best thing to do, we talked and everyone mentioned clean, drain, dry. I just want to go into depth about what clean, drain, dry really means. So it's threefold. So clean means to visually inspect the outside of your boat after you take it out of the water, or your fishing equipment, your kayak, anything like that. And it's important to wash all parts of your vehicle, rinse them off. Even the tail end of your truck, if you're backing your trailer into the water or in and out. And it would be even better if you could use hot water. That's not always the case, but hot water does ensure that the plant is dead, so that even if it continues to stick to your boat while you're traveling, it's not going to be able to be a viable organism when you enter a different water body. And anything you take off of your boat when you're cleaning it off, make sure you're disposing it onto land, so that you're not contributing to the same problem of fragmentation back into the water body that you just left. The next thing is to drain. So you want to drain all internal compartments of your watercraft, your kayak. Make sure you dump out your canoe, pull any plugs, especially in the case of your live wells in your boats. And then the next most important step is to dry. So completely drying all the surfaces in your equipment. It's pretty easy to have this happen just air dry out in the hot summer sun. But you can also make sure you use a sponge or a towel to clean or dry out your hard to get at areas. Like the sun isn't going to dry that for you, not necessarily in your live well would be an example of that. And it's really important that you let everything completely dry out before you move between different water bodies. There is some recommendation that you should wait 30 days if you're going to a different water body with your boat. That's not always something that is possible to happen, especially if you're traveling with angling tournaments or going on vacation or something like that. So that making sure that you can hand dry different areas and have a really good thorough inspection of your boat beforehand to make sure that you're not transporting anything that could easily be removed. That's clean, drain, dry, really written out. And we also have lots of signs up that explain it as well. And then just a few things that you can do to prepare for the upcoming recreation, boating, angling season is to be prepared. You're attending this webinar, you learned a little bit about how to identify the species. You can further your skills by attending more free workshops, learn from home on YouTube. There's lots of resources on the New Brunswick Invasive Species Council website. You practice clean, drain, dry, refresh yourself right before the season begins in May. You can volunteer with your local watershed group or lake association, such as with Juan, to go out and do those surveys, as he mentioned, or contribute to other groups depending on where you're traveling this summer. And you can also make a plan to regularly inspect your shoreline, just yourself as an individual, whether or not you're on the water 24/7 or just want to make sure that your shoreline stays clear from this species. Another awesome thing that you can do is join iNaturalist. As I mentioned, reporting things on iNaturalist, one, helps citizen scientists. or helps you be a citizen scientist and contribute to different research projects. It helps the Invasive Species Council stay in the know and track the spread of different things and other research groups. So if anybody has their phone on them, you can scan that QR code right that I have up here on the screen, and it'll give you some instructions about how to create your iNaturalist account. I can also give this to Juan. You can also just Google iNaturalist and get yourself set up. And there's lots of different projects you can join if you're interested in specifically aquatic plants or other aquatic ecosystem related things. So, and the next little pitch that I would like to share is that we're at the New Brunswick Invasive Species Council. We are hosting a coffee house style learning exercise with Dr. Meghann Bruce next week on Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 12 at the Charlotte Street Arts Center. So it's going to be an in-person event where we go a little bit more into depth on Eurasian Watermilfoil. If you'd like to come out and have an in-person chat with myself, my colleagues, or Meg, and that is just another opportunity for you to continue to bolster your knowledge and your expertise in this species, and we can all work together on this hot topic of Eurasian Watermilfoil. And with that, that's all I have. I can take any quick questions if anyone has any. I know we're a little bit over time, trying to keep that short and sweet. But yeah, you can reach me at my email, or you can reach out to us on social media. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you, Sarah. It was a great presentation. Thank you for going into detail of the clean, dry, and dry. It's really important. We have a couple of questions. First, people are asking if there is a suggested contact time for the hot water, or simply a rinse or lengthy clean. It's enough during the clean and dry.
So for zebra mussel, a different invasive species, hot boiling water or hot water that would come out of your tap would be on contact is typically what would kill a veliger, so the larval stage. We would want a greater length of time, like 10 to 15 seconds, to help any progressive sizes, so like juvenile mussels and whatnot. You would want to let, especially in your live well, if you've got water that's been sitting there for a long time, you want to let that drain or be flushed out for about 30 seconds. But overall, so long as you're using hot water in some capacity, typically also a good way of doing that is with a high pressure washer. That contact time, passing over it a few times, should be enough to at least cover your bases. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your answer. We have another question. Are there maps available showing existing locations of invasive species?
So currently, we've got a lot of different data. I'm actually currently working on putting together something that should be publicly accessible for Eurasian Watermilfoil locations across the province. If you're looking for an extensive data set, we're still in the process of collating lots of different data sets from different research groups. But your best bet at looking for emerging species or Eurasian Watermilfoil, iNaturalist actually has a really good map of New Brunswick. Lots of our staff, I know Meg has reported a few on there so that people can be aware. But that is a limited data set. Like I don't believe there's many data points for Grand Lake on iNaturalist at this time, but it would be great to increase that in the coming season. Not increase the number of invasive species on there, but increase the coverage of the pinpointing where it is.
Yeah, precisely. I did a review of that, and there is not many for aquatic plants, especially. There's almost none.
Yeah, there's not too many people that are looking under the water and reporting what's under the water. There's a lot more terrestrial based species that are on there, but we're working on it every day.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar and for all your great work. We have a few minutes. Oh, we have a few minutes more, maybe 2 minutes more. There is another question. Somebody have advised folks to drive for 5 to 7 days. So it's not long enough?
So that all depends really on the weather. If it's been very humid out, it needs to dry for longer. I use zebra mussel as the case for a lot of it because you cannot see the larval stage of that. So we recommend it should be about a week, at least if it's nice and dry and not very humid out. But where we live in the province that we do, humidity fluctuates all the time. The best thing to do for Eurasian water milfoil is to really inspect things and make sure you're looking for any type of piece of particle of plant. That will dry out a lot easier than a very, very small veliger for zebra mussel. 5 to 7 days is also your typical span from weekend to weekend. So if that is what you can do, and you're checking your boat, that's a very good practice to follow in and of itself.
And it also depends on what waters you're going to and from, right? So if you're going from one side of the Grand Lake to the other, or if you're going from the Fredericton region to Oromocto, if you're going back to the same waters, yeah, it's really when you're switching waters. And it's so hard to put those numbers on how long it takes something to dry because it is microclimate dependent too. Like, is your boat out in your yard on a paved driveway, cooking in the sun? Or even do you have it in a garage or a tent where it's, a bit sheltered and that moisture may hold?
Exactly.
Wow, lots of things to take in account when you're cleaning your boat. But it's very important, and we hope that you have learned a lot today. If you have more questions, then definitely contact us through our emails. Thank you very much, Sarah and Meghann, for joining us today. We have learned a lot and hope we can keep working together.
We will.
For sure.
Very much. Take care. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone, for taking the time to attend tonight and participate in this conversation.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you for attending. It was very nice to have you tonight.